You already know the feeling. Someone says something designed to get under your skin, and it works. Within seconds, you're composing the reply in your head, sharper than theirs. Final, the kind of message that will settle it. You send it, or you don't, and instead you replay the exchange for the rest of the day, rewriting your lines, losing hours to a conversation that's already over. Somewhere else, someone is moving faster than you, getting the promotion, the deal, the calm outcome, while you're still catching your breath from your last reaction. It looks like luck. It looks like they have some advantage you don't. You check your phone one more time than you meant to. You explain yourself one more time than the situation required. You give away your position, your plan, your next move, because staying quiet felt unbearable in the moment. Afterward, you always know you gave something away that you didn't need to give. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't proof that you're weak or too sensitive or bad at this. It's a strategic problem, and strategic problems have strategic solutions. 25 centuries ago, a general wrote down exactly why some people keep losing ground they didn't need to lose, and exactly what the ones who keep winning do instead. His name was Sun Tzu, and he never confused motion with progress. He commanded real armies in an era where a wrong decision meant real loss, and he noticed something that had nothing to do with weapons. The commanders who won weren't always the strongest. They were the ones who understood the situation clearly, controlled themselves completely, and only spent their strength when it actually counted. He put it simply, know the enemy and know yourself, and the outcome is never in doubt. Most people never get past the first half of that sentence. They spend their whole lives trying to read other people, other situations, other threats, and never turn that same clear, cold attention on themselves. That's where this starts. In the next few minutes, you're going to walk through 6 laws, Sun Tzu's laws, translated out of the battlefield and into your actual life, your career, your relationships, the argument you're still having in your head from 3 days ago. Each one exposes a place where you've been leaking strength without noticing. Each one hands you back a piece of the composure you didn't know you'd given away. The 5th law is the one that will actually test you. It's the moment most people fail, right before the version of themselves that wins finally arrives. Stay with it until then, because the people who understand it are the ones who look, from the outside, like they always win in the end. They're not luckier than you. They're not colder than you. They are simply more disciplined than you have been taught to be. Let's begin. Law 1. The war you keep losing is with yourself. You think your problem is the other person, the colleague who undermines you in meetings, the partner who goes quiet at exactly the wrong moment, the competitor who seems to know your next move before you make it. It feels like the whole contest is between you and them. Sun Tzu would tell you that's the wrong battlefield. Before he ever assessed an enemy, he assessed his own army, its discipline, its morale, its readiness. He knew a force that couldn't govern itself would lose to a much weaker force that could. The strength of the opponent was almost secondary. The real question was always, are we, internally, in order? Apply that to you, right now. Before you respond to the difficult email, before you walk into the hard conversation, before you decide whether to chase the opportunity or let it go. The real question isn't what will they do, it's am I, internally, in order? Most people skip this question entirely. They go straight to strategy against the other person while their own house is on fire. They're trying to outmaneuver a colleague while running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 unresolved arguments. They're trying to negotiate calmly while quietly furious about something unrelated that happened that morning. You cannot outthink a person while you are internally chaotic. You will lose to someone far less capable than you, simply because they showed up organized and you didn't. Here's a composite case. Call him Daniel, a stand-in for a pattern you've probably lived yourself. Daniel ran a small team, and he had a colleague, Priya, who had a habit of taking credit for shared work in front of leadership. Every time it happened, Daniel felt a jolt of injustice so sharp it hijacked the rest of his day. He'd fire off a defensive email. He'd corner Priya after the meeting and relitigate the moment. Voice tight, jaw tight. He'd vent to 3 different co-workers, turning a 5-minute slight into a running subplot of his week. None of it worked. Priya kept doing it. Leadership started to see Daniel as the person with the issue, not Priya as the person with the pattern. The failure wasn't that Daniel noticed the injustice. The injustice was real. The failure was that he let the injustice run him. Every reaction cost him composure, reputation, and energy, and none of it changed Priya's behavior. He was fighting a war with himself and losing it, while believing he was fighting Priya. This is the part modern psychology quietly confirms. Research on emotional regulation shows that people who can name and pause a reactive emotional state, rather than being swept by it, make measurably better decisions in the exact moment that matters most. The pause isn't weakness, it's the entire mechanism by which discipline outperforms impulse. Self-command isn't about suppressing what you feel. Suppression just delays the leak, it doesn't stop it. Self-command is about noticing the surge before it drives the car. Daniel's fury was legitimate information. It was telling him something true about the situation. But information and instruction are different things. The feeling can tell you what's wrong without getting to decide what you do about it. Here's the shift, and it's small enough to sound almost unimpressive. Before you respond to anything that has provoked you, ask what state you are actually in. Not what happened, what state you are in. Rushed, wounded, vindictive, exhausted. Name it specifically before you touch the keyboard or open your mouth. That single pause is the entire difference between the version of you that reacts and the version of you that decides. Daniel eventually changed one thing. He stopped responding to Priya in the moment. Not out of passivity, out of discipline. He started writing down what happened, dating it, and waiting. When he finally raised it, weeks later, in a calm one-on-one with his manager, he had a pattern instead of an outburst. Documented, specific, unemotional, it landed completely differently. Because he did. You are not being asked to stop noticing what's unfair. You are being asked to stop letting what's unfair pilot you. Sun Tzu's armies didn't win because nothing threatened them. They won because nothing threatened them internally, while something threatened them externally. That gap between the outer disturbance and the inner order is where every advantage in this video will live. Know yourself first. Everything else is downstream of that. There's a reason this law comes before every other one in this video, and it's not just structural. It's that every other law will fail without it. You cannot conserve your energy if you don't first notice when it's being drained. You cannot read the real terrain if your own internal weather is distorting what you see. You cannot prepare properly, hold your composure at the critical moment, or adapt with any flexibility if you don't have a baseline sense of your own state to begin with. This is why Sun Tzu's armies didn't march the moment they were assembled. They were assessed first: supplies, morale, discipline, the state of the officers, the state of the men. An army that skipped this step might still win, occasionally, against a weaker opponent, but it was gambling every time, because it never actually knew what it was bringing into the field. You are, in this sense, your own army, and most people have never once done an honest assessment of their own internal state before walking into something that mattered. They walk into the hard conversation still carrying the residue of an earlier one. They make the important decision on the day they're most exhausted, simply because that's the day it happened to land on the calendar. They let unrelated frustration bleed into a conversation that deserved a clear head, and then they're confused about why it went badly. The practice here is not complicated, but it is easy to skip. because it doesn't feel like doing anything. Before something that matters, a hard conversation, a big decision, a moment you know will be tense, take 30 seconds and simply ask what you're bringing into it. Not what you should be feeling, what you're actually feeling, underneath the feeling you'd prefer to be having. Tired, resentful, anxious, defensive, distracted, whatever it is, naming it accurately doesn't weaken your position. It's the only way to make sure that feeling doesn't quietly run the entire interaction without your permission. Daniel, eventually, built exactly this habit. Before any conversation with Priya, he started asking himself one question: what am I actually walking in with right now? Some days the honest answer was nothing, I'm fine, this is a normal conversation. Other days the honest answer was, I'm still angry about last week, and I need to deal with that before I deal with her. On those days, he waited. Not indefinitely, just long enough to walk in clear instead of loaded. That one habit, repeated for months, did more for how he was perceived at work than any clever argument or clever line ever could have. People started describing him, without quite being able to explain why, as someone who was hard to rattle. He hadn't become a different person. He had simply started checking his own terrain before stepping onto anyone else's. Law 2. Every reaction is a payment you can't get back. Here's something you already sense, but rarely name directly. Every reaction costs you something. Not metaphorically. Literally, attention, energy, credibility, position, all of it is finite, and every unnecessary reaction spends a little of it. Most people move through their days as if their reactions are free, as if getting angry costs nothing, as if explaining yourself for the 4th time costs nothing, as if chasing someone who's pulling away costs nothing. It all costs something. And the people who seem to move through life with more power than you usually aren't stronger. They're simply spending less. Sun Tzu built his entire approach to conflict around conservation. A prolonged, exhausting engagement drains a force even if it eventually wins. Victories that cost too much aren't real victories. He warned commanders against being provoked into battles that served the enemy's timing rather than their own. The goal was never to prove you could fight. The goal was to win with the least possible expenditure, ideally without a costly confrontation at all. Translate that into your week. Someone sends a message clearly designed to provoke a reaction. A dig disguised as a joke. A slight disguised as an observation. Your instinct is to respond immediately, to correct the record, to make sure they know you saw it and you're not intimidated. That instinct feels like strength. It is usually the opposite. You've just let someone else set the terms of your attention for free on their schedule. Not every provocation deserves a response. This is not the same as tolerating disrespect. It's recognizing that responding and being disrespected are two different decisions made at two different times, and you get to choose the timing of the first one, even when you didn't choose the second. There's a useful distinction hiding inside this, the difference between reacting and answering. A reaction is immediate, automatic, and usually serves the moment's emotional pressure. An answer is deliberate, and it serves your actual position. Sun Tzu's commanders famously refused battle on ground and timing they didn't choose. You can refuse a conversation on ground and timing you didn't choose too. That's not cowardice. That's positioning. This is where negotiation research lines up almost exactly with a 2,500-year-old military text. People who introduce a deliberate delay before responding to an emotionally charged offer or insult consistently negotiate better outcomes than people who respond instantly. The pause itself changes the leverage because it signals that you are not being run by the moment. Reactivity reads as weakness to a skilled opponent, even when it's dressed up as toughness. Consider a second composite case. A woman we'll call Renata, who ran her own small consulting practice. A former client, unhappy about a project that hadn't gone the way he wanted, started leaving pointed comments in shared documents, then began mentioning his complaints to mutual contacts. Renata's first instinct was to defend herself everywhere at once, replying to every comment, correcting every misrepresentation the moment she heard about it, trying to control the story in real time. It cost her weeks. It made her look defensive to people who hadn't even heard the original complaint. It kept the conflict alive far longer than the client's original comments ever would have on their own. What actually worked was almost uncomfortably simple. She stopped responding to the scattered jabs. She waited for the one conversation that actually mattered, a call with the client's business partner, who had real influence, and she spent her energy only there, prepared, clear, unhurried. Everywhere else, she let the noise be noise. She didn't win by fighting harder. She won by refusing almost every fight that wasn't the one that counted, and saving everything for the one that was. This is the discipline most people never learn. Not every insult requires a rebuttal. Not every delay requires an explanation. Not every silence from someone else requires you to fill it. Restraint is not the absence of a response. Restraint is a response. It's just one most people are too impatient to make. Ask yourself, before you spend anything, is this the ground I actually need to hold? Or is this just the ground that's loudest right now? The loudest ground and the important ground are rarely the same place. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from a life spent responding to everything, not the healthy tiredness of hard work, the depleted, scattered tiredness of someone who has answered every text immediately, addressed every slight in real time, defended every position the moment it was questioned. It feels productive while it's happening. It rarely is. It's just motion, and motion is not the same as progress. Sun Tzu's commanders were sometimes criticized by less patient rivals for refusing engagements that looked winnable. From the outside, restraint can look like fear or indecision or weakness. Sun Tzu didn't care how it looked. He cared what it cost and what it earned. A battle you didn't need to fight, won at great cost, was still a loss by his accounting, because the strength you spent on it was strength you no longer had for the moment that actually required it. This is worth sitting with, because it cuts against almost everything you've probably been taught about strength. Most people are raised to believe that responding to everything, defending every position, never letting anything go unanswered, is what strong people do. It isn't. It's what anxious people do, dressed up as strength. Genuinely strong people are usually the most selective people you know about where they spend themselves. They're not selective because they're passive. They're selective because they understand, the way Sun Tzu understood, that unlimited responsiveness is not a virtue. It's a leak. Try this the next time you feel the urge to respond to something that stung. Ask what you'd actually gain by responding, specifically, not generally. Not "I'd feel better." That's usually temporary and often false. What would actually change? If the honest answer is nothing would change, I'd just feel like I'd said my piece, that's useful information. It means the response is for you, not for the outcome, and there are cheaper ways to process a feeling than spending your position on it in public. This doesn't mean going silent about everything that bothers you. It means recognizing that silence, chosen deliberately, is itself a form of action, often the most powerful one available, because it deprives the provocation of the reaction it was designed to produce. An unanswered jab has nowhere to go. It just sits there, oddly deflated, while the person who threw it waits for a response that never arrives. Law 3. Read the ground, not the story you tell yourself. There's a version of every difficult situation that exists in reality, and a version that exists in your head. They are almost never identical, and the gap between them is where most people lose. Sun Tzu spent enormous attention on what he called the terrain, the actual physical and situational conditions a commander was operating in. Not the terrain he wished he had, not the terrain from the last campaign, the terrain in front of him, right now, assessed without wishful thinking or panic. He considered failure to read the ground correctly one of the most reliable ways an army destroyed itself, often before the enemy ever got involved. You do this to yourself constantly, just with different terrain. You walk into a hard conversation already convinced of how it will go, based on the last 3 times something similar happened. You decide someone's silence means rejection before you've confirmed anything. You treat a single setback as proof of a pattern, when it might just be a single setback. None of that is reading the terrain. That's writing a story and then reacting to the story as if it were the ground beneath your feet. Here's the quiet, unglamorous cross-check from behavioral science. People under stress systematically overweight recent, emotionally vivid information and underweight the calmer, more complete picture. It's a known bias, not a personal failing. The mind narrows under threat, and narrowed attention feels like clarity even when it's the opposite. Sun Tzu didn't have that vocabulary, but he built his entire discipline around correcting for exactly that distortion. Gather real information, assess calmly, then act, never the reverse. So the practice is uncomfortable, but simple. Before you respond to a situation, separate what you actually know from what you're currently assuming. Write it out if you have to, literally in 2 columns. Known, assumed. Most people discover the second column is doing almost all the emotional work, while the first column is nearly empty. This matters most in relationships, because relationships are where the story versus terrain gap does the most damage. A partner takes longer than usual to reply to a message, and within minutes you've built an entire narrative. They're pulling away. They're losing interest. Something is wrong, and you start behaving as if that narrative is confirmed fact. You get short with them. You test them. You demand reassurance in a tone that makes the very thing you feared more likely. The terrain was, they took longer than usual to reply. Everything else was a story you wrote and then reacted to as if the enemy had already attacked. Sun Tzu's commanders sent scouts before they moved an army. Not because they lacked courage, because acting on unverified terrain was the fastest way to lose an army that should have won. Your version of a scout is smaller and less dramatic. One clarifying question, one moment of checking instead of assuming. One pause long enough to ask, what do I actually know here, before you commit to a reaction built on what you fear. This isn't about becoming naive or endlessly giving people the benefit of the doubt, regardless of evidence. It's about refusing to spend your strength defending against a threat that might not even be the real shape of what's happening. Read the ground first, move second. The people who seem to navigate conflict and uncertainty with unusual calm are rarely working with better information than you. They've simply trained themselves to notice the difference between what's true and what's just loud. There's a further layer to this that Sun Tzu understood, and most modern advice skips entirely. Terrain changes. The ground that was true yesterday isn't necessarily the ground that's true today. A colleague who was cold to you last month might simply be having a hard month of their own, unrelated to you, and yet you'll carry last month's terrain into today's interaction as if it were still current. Relationships especially suffer from this. People get frozen in an old version of a conflict, responding to a person who has already changed, defending against a threat that no longer exists in the form it once did. This is worth naming plainly. Reading the terrain isn't a one-time exercise. It's a habit of continuous, honest recalibration. Sun Tzu's scouts didn't report back once and retire. They kept reporting because the ground kept shifting, and a commander who acted on last week's intelligence in this week's battle was as vulnerable as one who never gathered any intelligence at all. Bring this back to something ordinary. Maybe there's a person in your life you've quietly decided is always like that. Always dismissive, always difficult, always cold. That judgment might have been accurate once, built on real evidence. But if you're still treating every interaction with them as confirmation of a story you wrote months or years ago, you're not reading terrain anymore. You're reading a memory and calling it the present. The corrective isn't blind optimism, assuming everyone has changed and every pattern has resolved itself. It's simply staying willing to update. Each interaction gets assessed on what actually happens in it, not just filed automatically under the old story. This is harder than it sounds, because the old story is comfortable. It requires no new information, no risk of being wrong, no vulnerability to being disappointed again. But comfort and accuracy are different things, and only one of them will actually serve you. Sun Tzu never asked his commanders to be naive about danger. He asked them to be accurate about it, no more afraid than the actual terrain warranted, and no less prepared than it required. That's the balance worth aiming for here too. Not blind trust, not permanent suspicion, just an honest, continuously updated read of what's actually in front of you. Law 4. Win before you fight. Almost everyone believes that strength is proven in the confrontation itself, in the argument, in the standoff, in the moment where you finally, clearly say the thing. Sun Tzu didn't believe that at all. He believed the confrontation was usually the least important part of the outcome, that the truly decisive work happened long before anyone was standing across from anyone else. Position, preparation, patience, and clarity did almost all the work. By the time two forces actually met, the stronger position had usually already been established. The fight itself was often just a formality confirming what was already true. This reframes almost every conflict you've ever dreaded. You've probably spent hours rehearsing the confrontation, the perfect line, the moment you finally say what you've been holding back, the scene where you're vindicated. All of that energy is being spent on the least controllable, least important part of the outcome. The confrontation is the visible 10%. The preparation is the invisible 90%. What does winning before the fight actually look like off the battlefield? It looks unglamorous. It looks like doing the work no one sees. It looks like Renata from the earlier chapter, having every relevant fact organized and calm before she ever got on that call with her client's business partner, so that when the moment came, there was nothing left to figure out in real time, only something to present. It looks like knowing your numbers before you ask for a raise. So the conversation isn't a negotiation of feelings, but a presentation of facts. It looks like being emotionally settled before a hard conversation with a partner, so you're not discovering how you feel in the middle of the discussion, in front of the person you're discussing it with. Most confrontations are lost or won before a single word is exchanged, because most people walk in either over-prepared emotionally and under-prepared practically, or the reverse, full of feeling, empty of facts, or full of facts, boiling with unexamined feeling. Either way, they're not actually ready. They just feel ready, which is a different thing entirely. There's a specific trap worth naming here, the urge to win the conversation instead of win the outcome. These sound similar. They are not. Winning the conversation means landing the sharper line, having the last word, making the other person visibly wrong. Winning the outcome means the actual result you wanted, the raise, the repaired relationship, the resolved conflict, regardless of who said the cleverer thing along the way. Sun Tzu never cared about who looked more impressive mid-battle. He cared about what remained standing afterward. This is where the discipline gets quiet, almost invisible from the outside. Preparing before you need to. Getting your facts, your finances, your evidence, your calm in order while nothing is on fire, so that when something is on fire, you're not building the raft while you're already in the water. Ask yourself, honestly, for the conflict currently sitting in the back of your mind, have you actually prepared, or have you only imagined the moment of confrontation? Those are different kinds of work, and only one of them changes the outcome. The people who look, from the outside, like they handle everything with unnerving ease, are almost never improvising in the moment. They did the invisible work early, when it wasn't dramatic, when no one was watching, when it would have been easier to skip. That's the whole secret. It was never a secret at all. It was just work most people weren't willing to do before it felt urgent. There's a psychological cost to skipping this preparation that's worth naming directly. because it explains why underprepared confrontations feel so much worse than they need to, even when they go fine. When you walk into something important without having done the quiet work beforehand, part of your mind is doing two jobs at once, managing the actual conversation and simultaneously scrambling to generate the facts, the composure, and the position you should have already had in place. That divided attention is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the difficulty of the conversation itself. It's the cost of building the raft while you're already in the water. And it's a cost you pay whether or not the confrontation goes well. Compare that to walking into the same conversation already prepared. The facts are settled. The emotional work is mostly done. There's nothing left to figure out in the moment, only something to deliver. The conversation might still be hard. Preparation doesn't remove difficulty, but it stops being chaotic. You're no longer managing two jobs. You're doing one job calmly, because the other one is already finished. This is why Sun Tzu spent so much more of his writing on preparation, positioning, and information gathering than he ever spent on the mechanics of actual combat. The fight itself, in his framework, is almost an afterthought, a brief, almost procedural confirmation of work that was already done. Modern life inverts this instinct constantly. People spend their energy rehearsing the confrontation and almost none of it on the preparation that would make the confrontation nearly unnecessary. Flip that ratio, and the confrontations that remain get dramatically easier, because they're no longer where the real work happens. The real work already happened, quietly, beforehand. Law 5. The line you don't cross this is the one that actually tests you. Everything up to this point has been about restraint, in situations where restraint is relatively survivable. An annoying colleague, a slow reply, a rehearsed argument. Now the stakes go up. Because this is the moment where discipline stops being a nice idea and becomes the only thing standing between you and a version of yourself you'll regret. Sun Tzu wrote about the general who is provoked past the point of clear judgment, and he treated this as one of the most dangerous failures a leader could have. More dangerous, in many cases, than a weaker army or a worse position. A commander goaded into rash action, acting from injured pride rather than clear assessment, could lose in an afternoon what took years to build. The enemy didn't even need to be stronger. They only needed to find the place where your composure would break and press there. You have a place like that. Everyone does. The specific insult, the specific silence, the specific betrayal that doesn't just provoke you, it detonates something. In that moment, every principle from the earlier chapters gets tested at once, under conditions where following them is hardest and abandoning them feels most justified. This is the moment, not a small daily friction. The real one, the message you're one sentence away from sending that you can never take back. The decision, made in fury or panic or wounded pride, that will cost you far more than the provocation itself ever did. The confrontation, where you finally have the chance to make someone else feel as small as they made you feel, and every part of you wants to take it. Here is what Sun Tzu understood, and what almost no one believes in the actual moment. The person who successfully provokes you into acting against your own judgment has already won, regardless of what happens next. It doesn't matter if your sharp reply was factually correct. It doesn't matter if your rage was justified. The moment you act from the hijacked state instead of the clear one, you have handed over control of the outcome to whatever provoked you. You are no longer choosing. You are being moved. This is the exact mechanism decision science describes under conditions of high emotional arousal. The capacity for weighing consequences narrows sharply, and people consistently choose the action that discharges the feeling right now over the action that serves them an hour, a day, or a year from now. It isn't a character defect, it's what an activated nervous system does, unless something interrupts it. Sun Tzu's answer to this, over 2,000 years, before anyone had that language, was the same one modern practice arrives at. Build the interruption in advance, because you cannot reliably build it in the moment. That's the whole task of this chapter. Not stay calm, which is advice with no mechanism behind it. Build the interruption before you need it. Decide, now, in this calm moment, what you will do the next time you feel that specific detonation. Not what you'll feel, you can't control that. What you'll do. Maybe it's a rule, nothing gets sent for 24 hours. Maybe it's a person you call before you act, someone who will tell you the truth instead of what you want to hear. Maybe it's as simple as physically standing up and leaving the room before you respond to anything. The specific mechanism matters less than the fact that you decide it now, while you're capable of deciding, rather than later, when you won't be. Picture the moment honestly. The words are right there. You could send them in 4 seconds. Every part of your body is telling you this is strength. This is finally standing up for yourself. This is the moment you stop being the person who holds back. It is not that moment. It is the opposite of that moment. The person who holds their composure here is not weaker than the person who breaks. They are the only one of the two who is still actually in command of what happens next. This is the line. Not a boundary someone else draws for you, the boundary you hold against your own worst instinct. At the exact moment it is most expensive to hold and most tempting to abandon. Everything before this chapter was practice. This is the test the practice was for. Hold the line here, and everything after this becomes possible. Break it here, and you will spend a long time rebuilding what one moment of ungoverned reaction cost you. Sun Tzu's greatest generals were not the ones who never felt provoked. They were the ones who had already decided, long before the provocation arrived, exactly who they were going to be when it did. Decide now, before you need to. There is one more layer to this, and it's the part most people skip, because it's less satisfying than the idea of holding the line in a single dramatic moment. The line isn't usually tested once. It's tested repeatedly, in smaller versions, long before the big one ever arrives, and how you handle the small tests quietly determines whether you'll be capable of handling the large one. Every time you let a minor provocation pull a reaction out of you that you didn't actually choose, you're rehearsing being moved. You're practicing the very failure you're trying to avoid, just at lower stakes, where it feels less costly and so goes unnoticed. And every time you catch a small provocation, name it, and choose your response deliberately instead, you're rehearsing the opposite. You're building, in tiny, undramatic increments, the exact capacity you'll need the day the provocation isn't small anymore. This is why the earlier laws in this video weren't just separate lessons. They were training. Every time you paused before responding to an annoying message, you were preparing for this chapter without knowing it. Every time you declined to spend your energy on ground that didn't matter, you were building the same muscle you're being asked to use right now, at far higher stakes. Sun Tzu's disciplined armies weren't disciplined because of one extraordinary effort on the day of the battle. They were disciplined because that discipline had been drilled, in small, unremarkable ways, every day leading up to it. So if the moment described in this chapter arrives for you soon, and for most people watching this, it will, sooner than they expect, you are not starting from zero. You've been practicing, whether you realized it or not, in every smaller moment of restraint you've chosen throughout this video. The line will still be hard to hold. It's supposed to be hard. That's what makes holding it worth something. But it will not be a skill you're inventing on the spot, under the worst possible conditions. It will be a skill you've already been quietly building, in exactly the way Sun Tzu believed all real strength was built, not in the dramatic moment, but in the disciplined ordinary ones that came before it. Law 6. Formless as water, firm as stone there's, a version of discipline that looks like rigidity, jaw clenched, plan fixed, refusing to bend no matter what the situation actually calls for. That's not what any of this has been about, and it's worth naming clearly, because it's the trap that catches people right after they finally learn restraint. Sun Tzu's ideal wasn't a wall, it was water. Water has no fixed shape of its own. It takes the shape of whatever ground it moves across, finding the low places, the openings, the path of least resistance, without ever losing what it fundamentally is. He considered the ability to adapt, moment to moment, to the actual shape of the situation, to be the mark of real mastery. Rigid plans, however well designed, broke against situations they weren't built for. Formlessness didn't. This is the piece that completes everything before it. Discipline is not the same as stubbornness. Restraint is not the same as refusing to change your approach. You can hold your composure completely and still update your strategy the moment the situation actually shifts. In fact, you can only update wisely once you've stopped reacting. A mind that's still flooded with the last provocation can't read the new terrain clearly enough to adapt to it. This is where the earlier laws stop being separate ideas and start being one continuous discipline. You know yourself, so you're not blindsided by your own reactions. You conserve your energy, so you have something left when it actually matters. You read the real terrain instead of the story in your head, so your response fits the actual situation. You prepare before the confrontation, so you're not improvising under pressure. You hold the line at the moment of highest provocation, so you're still the one deciding, not the one being moved. And now, formless as water, you let all of that flexibility serve you, instead of trapping you in a plan that no longer fits what's actually happening. Picture the version of you that has all 6 of these in place at once. Someone provokes them, and they notice the provocation clearly, without being swept by it. They don't need to spend energy proving anything, because they already know what they know. They check the actual terrain instead of assuming the worst. They already prepared, so there's nothing to scramble for. If it's the real test, they hold the line, calm, deciding rather than reacting. And through all of it, they stay adaptable, willing to change course the instant the situation calls for it. Because their steadiness was never about forcing a fixed plan. It was about staying clear enough to choose the right one. That person doesn't look aggressive. They don't look cold. From the outside, they often look almost unremarkable, quiet, measured, hard to rattle. That quietness is not the absence of strength. It is what strength looks like once it no longer needs to announce itself. This is the long game Sun Tzu actually taught. Not a single dramatic victory. A compounding discipline applied consistently in small, unglamorous moments that no one else is watching until the pattern becomes who you are, rather than something you have to remember to do. It's worth being honest about what formlessness is not, because it's easy to mistake for something weaker than it is. It is not indecisiveness. Water still moves with total commitment. It simply commits to the shape the actual ground calls for, rather than the shape it decided on before it arrived. It is not people-pleasing, endlessly reshaping yourself to avoid friction with everyone around you. Water doesn't dissolve when it meets an obstacle. It finds its way around or through, without losing anything of what it fundamentally is. And it is not the absence of a plan. It's the refusal to let a plan outlive its usefulness simply because you're attached to having made it. Sun Tzu's rigid opponents, the ones who lost most often in his accounts, weren't the ones who lacked discipline. They were often disciplined in exactly the wrong way. Disciplined about defending a plan, instead of disciplined about reading what the moment actually required. That's the trap worth naming clearly here, at the end of this list of laws, because it's the one most likely to catch someone who has taken the earlier 5 seriously. Composure that hardens into stubbornness isn't composure anymore. It's just a different, quieter kind of being run by something other than clear judgment. The people who embody this best don't announce it. They don't need to. Their strength shows up as an unusual kind of ease. Not the ease of someone who doesn't care, but the ease of someone who has stopped needing to force outcomes because they've learned to read the ground clearly enough to work with it instead of against it. Resolution and integration go back to where this started, the message you almost sent. The story you almost let run you. The confrontation you almost walked into unprepared. None of those moments have disappeared. They will come again, probably soon, in some new disguise. That's not a failure of what you've just learned. That's simply what it means to be a person with a nervous system, living among other people who occasionally provoke it. What's changed is not the world. What's changed is what happens inside you the next time it does. You are no longer someone who mistakes their first feeling for their final decision. You know now that the feeling is information, not instruction, that it's allowed to exist fully without getting to drive. You are no longer someone who spends their strength on every provocation that presents itself, because you understand that energy is finite, and the loudest fight is rarely the one that matters. You are no longer someone who reacts to the story in their head instead of the terrain in front of them, because you've built the habit of separating what you know from what you merely fear. You've decided in advance who you're going to be at the moment you're provoked past your limit, which means that moment no longer gets to decide for you. And you're no longer someone who confuses rigidity with strength, because you understand now that real discipline bends without breaking, adapts without losing itself, stays formless without ever losing its shape. This is not a personality transplant. You will still feel the surge of anger, the ache of being slighted, the pull to explain yourself one more time than necessary. Discipline was never about not feeling those things. It was about no longer being owned by them the instant they arrive. Here is what tends to happen to people who actually practice this. Over months rather than days, the world doesn't get less difficult. People don't stop testing you, provoking you, moving faster than you'd like, saying the thing designed to get under your skin. What changes is your reaction time to your own reactions. You notice the surge earlier, you recover your footing faster. The gap between provocation and composed response gets shorter and shorter, until eventually it's so short that other people stop being able to find the lever that used to move you so easily. That's when something interesting starts happening around you, almost as a side effect. People who once tried to provoke you stop bothering, because it no longer works, and provoking someone who isn't moved is not satisfying to anyone. Situations that once felt like emergencies start reading, correctly, as smaller than they seemed. Opportunities that require patience, the slow-building kind, the kind that reward the person still standing after everyone else burned out, start to actually land in your hands, because you're one of the few people left who was willing to wait for them. This is the quiet power Sun Tzu was actually describing, underneath all the language of armies and terrain and generals. It was never really about war. It was about the fact that most people are at war with themselves, their impatience, their wounded pride, their impulse to prove something in the moment instead of building something over time, and losing that internal war quietly, every single day, without ever realizing that's the war costing them everything else. You don't have to keep losing it. Not through force, not through becoming harder, colder, less feeling than you were before. Through discipline, the unglamorous, repeated, mostly invisible discipline of choosing your response instead of surrendering to your reaction, one moment at a time, until it stops being a choice you have to make and starts being simply who you are. That is what it means to win in the end. Not a single dramatic victory over another person. Command of yourself, held steadily enough, for long enough, that the world eventually has no choice but to respond to the person you've become. It's worth saying plainly what this isn't, because the language of discipline and composure can be misread as coldness, and that was never the point. None of this asks you to stop caring, stop feeling deeply, or start treating the people in your life like opponents to be managed. Sun Tzu's discipline wasn't the discipline of someone who felt nothing. It was the discipline of someone who felt everything clearly enough to still choose well in the middle of it. The goal was never numbness. The goal was clarity that survives contact with feeling instead of being swept away by it. Think back, one more time, to Daniel and Renata, not because their situations were extraordinary, but because they weren't. An unfair colleague, a difficult client, the kind of friction almost everyone deals with in some form on an ordinary week. What changed wasn't the difficulty of what they faced. It was the quality of attention they brought to facing it. Daniel didn't get a better coworker. He got better at not handing his coworker the power to run his week. Renata didn't get an easier client. She got better at spending her energy only where it actually mattered, instead of everywhere the client's frustration happened to land. That's the realistic promise here, and it's worth being honest that it is realistic rather than magical. This practice doesn't make your life free of difficult people, difficult moments, or difficult decisions. It makes you the kind of person those difficulties can no longer easily move. Over time, that difference compounds in ways that are almost impossible to see week to week, and impossible to miss looking back over a year. The version of you who held the line quietly, again and again, in moments no one else even noticed, ends up standing somewhere completely different from the version who kept spending themselves on every provocation that came along. That's the long game, not a single decisive moment that changes everything at once. The way it tends to happen in stories. A long accumulation of ordinary moments, held with just slightly more discipline than instinct wanted to give them, until the accumulation itself becomes the advantage no one else can quite explain. If you've made it this far, you already understand that this isn't really about Sun Tzu, or ancient armies, or terrain you'll never stand on. It's about the version of you that shows up the next time you're provoked, overwhelmed, or moving too fast to think clearly. The version that pauses half a second longer than instinct wants to. The version that reads the real situation instead of the story fear wrote about it. The version that already decided, calmly, who they'd be before the moment that tests them ever arrived. That version of you gets built slowly, in exactly this kind of practice, not in one video, but in the accumulation of small moments where you choose composure over impulse and no one is around to see it. If this way of thinking is useful to you, stay close. There are more of these laws to walk through together, and this discipline is easier to hold when you're not holding it alone. You already know the feeling of being outmaneuvered, overwhelmed, reactive, stuck. You also now know the way out of it. Disciplined people always win in the end, not because the world stops testing them, but because they stopped losing the one war that was always theirs to win.